The people up on Blackthorn Ridge cut down my trees so they could improve the sunset view from their million-dollar patios. And for about 24 hours, they probably thought they got away with it. What they didn't realize was that those trees were the only thing stopping me from noticing something way worse. By the end of that week, half the neighborhood was threatening lawsuits. The HOA president wouldn't look me in the eye anymore, and there was an 8-foot steel wall sitting exactly where their precious valley view used to be. I wish I could tell you I handled it calmly from the beginning, but honestly, when I first saw what they did, I just stood there in my driveway feeling sick. You gotta understand, I'd lived on that property almost 15 years. It wasn't some giant ranch or anything fancy, just a quiet piece of land outside Belhaven County, tucked below this newer development they carved into the ridge a few years back. My place used to belong to an older couple named Walter and June. Walter planted most of those trees himself sometime in the late 70s, maples, cedar, a few blue spruce mixed in there. He once told me, "Trees make better neighbors than people." At the time I laughed about it. Later on, I realized the old man might have been a prophet. Anyway, the folks up in Blackthorn Ridge were a different species entirely. Every house looked like it came straight out of a luxury real estate commercial, giant windows, outdoor fireplaces, kitchens nobody actually cooked in. The kind of neighborhood where people wave at you with 2 fingers while checking whether your truck leaks oil onto the pavement. They built those homes along the ridge because the western view overlooked the entire valley. Problem was, my tree line sat directly below them. So from certain patios, especially the bigger homes near the southern edge, all they really saw at sunset was a wall of green. Personally, I always thought that sounded like a blessing. But apparently rich people don't spend $2 million to stare at cedar branches. The day I found out, I'd just gotten off a 12-hour shift at the equipment yard. I remember the sky being this deep orange color, one of those summer evenings where the whole world looks softer for a minute. I turned into my gravel driveway, and immediately something felt off. Took me a second to understand what it was. The sunlight was hitting my back porch directly. That had never happened before. I got out of the truck slowly, looking toward the property line, and my stomach just dropped. Half my trees looked butchered. Not fallen, not storm-damaged, butchered. Branches were missing only on the uphill side, the side facing Blackthorn Ridge. Fresh cuts everywhere. Sap still running down the bark. It looked surgical, honestly. Whoever did it knew exactly which limbs to remove to open the view without technically killing the trees outright. I walked the line for maybe 10 minutes without even realizing it, just staring at everything in disbelief. One of the cedars had this huge branch missing that used to block the view directly from a house with this massive stone balcony. I actually remember looking up at that balcony and seeing patio furniture silhouetted against the sunset, like somebody was probably sitting there enjoying the exact view they stole from me. That part really got under my skin. Not even the damage itself. The entitlement. Like my land existed for their convenience. I went inside, poured myself a bourbon, then checked the security cameras. And there they were. 10:14 that morning, a white utility truck came crawling down the old maintenance path behind my property. No company logo, no plate on the front bumper, just 2 guys in reflective vests hopping out with chainsaws already running. No hesitation. No checking addresses. Nothing. They moved fast too, dropping limbs in sections like they'd done this before. One guy actually pointed uphill a couple times while the other cut, like somebody was directing the whole thing from one of those houses above. I paused the footage and zoomed in until the image got grainy. Couldn't make out faces clearly, but I got the license plate. And that's when the whole thing stopped feeling random. Because people don't sneak onto private property with chainsaws unless they're very sure somebody important will protect them afterward. The next morning, I drove up to Blackthorn Ridge for the first time in years, and the second I reached the gate, I could already tell these people weren't used to hearing the word no. The woman at the front gate smiled at me the same way flight attendants smile during turbulence, polite, rehearsed, slightly nervous around the eyes. I told her I needed to speak with whoever ran the HOA, and she asked if I had an appointment. I remember laughing a little because my trees had apparently gotten an appointment with a chainsaw before I did. About 40 minutes later, I was sitting inside this spotless office across from a woman named Denise Calder, the community operations manager for Blackthorn Ridge. Everything in that office looked staged. Neutral colors, scented candles, framed sunset photography on the walls, which honestly felt a little insulting considering why I was there. Denise folded her hands on the desk and gave me this soft corporate smile. Mr. Grady, we understand there's concern regarding the vegetation bordering the South Ridge properties. Vegetation. That's what she called trees older than both of us. I slid printed photos across her desk. Somebody trespassed on my property and cut them. She glanced down for maybe half a second before saying, there seems to have been confusion regarding shared growth areas. I said, there's no confusion. I own the land. She nodded slowly like I was being difficult on purpose. Several homeowners had concerns about obstructed views affecting property value. I just stared at her for a second because the honesty of that statement almost impressed me. Not safety concerns. Not wildfire concerns. Property values. Sunset aesthetics. I asked if she approved the work, and she immediately got careful with her wording. The association did not directly commission unauthorized landscaping. That sentence right there told me everything. Somebody connected to the HOA arranged it, then kept enough distance to deny responsibility later. I could feel it. Denise offered reimbursement for trimming costs, which honestly made me angrier than if she'd insulted me outright. I remember leaning forward and saying, do you have any idea how long it takes to grow privacy? She didn't answer that one. She just kept smiling in that tight, uncomfortable way people do when they know they're standing on rotten ground. On the drive home, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, and the more I thought about it, the more something else started bothering me. Not the trees, the timing. Because ever since Blackthorn Ridge went up, I'd occasionally notice people standing out on those glass balconies looking down toward my property. At first I figured it was harmless curiosity. My place sat lower in the valley with woods wrapping around it. So from above it probably looked peaceful compared to their copy-paste luxury boxes. But after the trimming, suddenly my entire backyard felt exposed. That evening, I walked the property line again just before dark. And that's when I noticed the cameras. Once I saw one, I saw all of them, mounted along the rear ridge fencing behind several homes, angled downward. Not toward their own streets. Not toward entry points. Toward my property. One pointed almost directly at my back deck. Another lined up with the side windows near my bedroom. I stood there in the dirt feeling this weird mix of anger and embarrassment crawling up my spine because all at once, memories started connecting in my head. Random moments over the years. Walking outside in the morning with coffee. My ex-wife tanning near the pool years ago before we split. Nights sitting on the porch talking on the phone. And all that time, who exactly had been watching from up there? The next morning I called my friend Leon. He used to work county surveying before retirement, cranky old guy, smoked too much, trusted nobody. I told him I needed boundary markers verified immediately. He came out that Saturday wearing mud-stained boots and carrying enough equipment to invade a small country. We spent nearly 6 hours walking the line. Around noon he stopped near one of the camera poles and muttered, well now that's interesting. Turns out 2 of those poles crossed several inches into my property easement. Not much, legally speaking, but enough. Leon grinned like he'd just found gold. Rich folks get real stupid when they think scenery belongs to them. By Monday morning, bright orange stakes lined the entire back edge of my land like warning signs. And Blackthorn Ridge noticed immediately. Around 10, a woman in white tennis clothes actually walked halfway down the hill toward me while I was moving lumber near the shed. She had sunglasses bigger than her face and carried one of those tiny designer dogs tucked under her arm. Excuse me, she called out. What exactly is happening? I told her I was reclaiming my privacy. She looked confused for a second before saying, well, the neighborhood has always enjoyed the open atmosphere here. I almost laughed. Open atmosphere. That's rich people language for access to things that aren't theirs. I asked her if she enjoyed staring into other people's yards too, or if that was just an HOA perk. She got offended immediately, muttered something about hostility, then marched back uphill clutching that little dog like I'd threatened national security. By Tuesday, things escalated fast. My attorney sent certified letters to both the HOA and several individual homeowners requesting immediate removal or repositioning of surveillance equipment violating privacy lines. At the same time, I hired a fencing contractor named Alvarez. Big guy, former Marine, didn't ask unnecessary questions. He came out, studied the survey stakes, then looked uphill toward those giant houses. You want decorative, he asked, or you want effective? I said, I want them to stop seeing my life. He nodded once. Effective it is. Construction started Wednesday morning at 8 sharp. The sound alone drove the Ridge residents insane. Metal posts hammered into the earth all day long while crews poured concrete and lifted massive dark steel panels into place section by section. 8 feet tall. Smooth finish. Completely legal under county code. By lunchtime, several balconies had already lost their valley view. By sunset, all they could see was steel. I won't lie to you, standing in my backyard that first evening after the panels went up felt incredible. Quiet. Protected. Mine again. For the first time since noticing those cameras, I sat on my porch without feeling observed. But apparently the people on Blackthorn Ridge were having a collective meltdown. Around 7 that night, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered and a man introduced himself as Victor Lang, president of the Blackthorn Ridge HOA. His voice sounded very different from Denise's. Less polished, more strained. "Mr. Grady," he said carefully, "we believe the fence may be an overreaction." I looked out at the steel wall while sipping bourbon and said, "Funny, I thought the chainsaws were an overreaction." He ignored that. "The structure is creating significant visual obstruction for multiple homeowners." That was kind of the point. Long silence. Then he lowered his voice and said, "Surely we can reach a compromise here." That word compromise almost made me laugh because compromise usually happens before somebody trespasses onto your land and spies on your house for years. I told him, "Your cameras were pointed at my bedroom windows." Silence again. Real silence this time. I could practically hear the man recalculating his entire legal situation in real time. Then he asked quietly, "What exactly do you want?" And honestly, that question sat with me for a minute because up until then, I'd been reacting out of anger. But standing there in the dark looking at that fence, I realized this wasn't really about revenge anymore. It was about boundaries. Respect. The kind people only seem to understand once inconvenience finally reaches their side of the property line. Victor called back the next morning around 9, and this time he sounded less like an HOA president and more like a guy trying to stop a leak before the whole dam burst. He asked if we could meet in person, somewhere neutral. I told him there was a diner off Route 8 with decent coffee and terrible pancakes. And an hour later, we were sitting across from each other in a cracked vinyl booth while retirees argued over baseball 2 tables away. Honestly, that contrast made the whole thing feel surreal. Here was this man wearing a $1,000 jacket, trying to negotiate over stolen sunsets while Betty at the register yelled at somebody for putting ketchup on hash browns. Victor was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, polished in that corporate consultant kind of way. But he looked tired. The kind of tired people get when wealthy homeowners start threatening lawsuits every 15 minutes. He folded his hands and said, "This situation has escalated beyond what anyone intended." I took a sip of coffee and said, "Funny, because trespassing onto private property with chainsaws feels like a pretty committed first step." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "No one authorized illegal activity." "No," I said. "You just benefited from it." That one landed. You could see it in his face. For a few seconds, he just stared out the diner window, toward the highway, like maybe there was a version of this conversation where he still had control over it. Then he finally admitted what I'd suspected all along. A handful of homeowners near the South Ridge had been complaining for over a year about the blocked valley view. Apparently, one couple in particular, the Halstons, had pushed the issue aggressively during HOA meetings. According to Victor, they'd even threatened to sue the association over declining property value. And there it was, the real motivation underneath all of it. Money. It always circles back to money eventually. The Halstons wanted prettier sunsets for cocktail parties, and the HOA got desperate enough to start blurring lines they never should have touched. Victor insisted he didn't know anyone planned to physically cut the trees, but honestly, by then I didn't care who held the chainsaw. Somebody opened the door for it. He asked what it would take to resolve things peacefully. I told him the fence stays. Non-negotiable. His jaw tightened immediately. That structure is affecting multiple homes. I leaned back and said, "So did your cameras." Another long silence. Then he asked what else. And that's when I laid everything out. Every damaged tree replaced with mature native growth, not saplings. Written maintenance guarantees for 5 years. Complete relocation of all rear-facing surveillance equipment. Formal acknowledgement of property violations. Legal fees covered. And one more thing. I wanted the homeowners responsible named directly in the complaint settlement. Victor actually blinked at that one. "You want public accountability?" "No." I said. I want people who hide behind HOA letters to experience their own names attached to consequences for once. We sat there quietly after that. You ever notice how restaurants always get louder during uncomfortable conversations? Silverware clinking, coffee machines hissing, somebody laughing too hard across the room. It felt like the entire diner kept moving while this guy's little manufactured neighborhood empire slowly came apart in front of him. By Friday, contractors started showing up at my property again. Different crew this time. More careful, more respectful. They knocked before entering. Funny how quickly manners appear once attorneys get involved. Over the next week, they planted 12-foot cedar replacements along the damaged line and installed privacy screening between several ridge homes where the cameras used to sit. County inspectors came out too. Turns out a few of those surveillance placements violated more codes than just mine. One homeowner got fined over an improperly mounted pole crossing utility easements. Another had recording equipment aimed directly into neighboring residential windows. That story spread through Belhaven faster than wildfire. Suddenly, Blackthorn Ridge wasn't the prestigious dream community anymore. It was the creepy hill where rich people secretly filmed their neighbors. And man, the locals loved that. The diner crowd especially. Every time I walked in after that, somebody had a new rumor. One guy claimed a resident tried paying contractors double to secretly remove part of my fence overnight. Another said two couples inside the HOA board stopped speaking entirely because everyone started blaming each other for the legal mess. I don't know how much of that was true, but I do know one thing for certain. Nobody waved at me with fake politeness anymore. About 2 weeks later, a formal apology arrived by certified mail. Real signatures, real admissions, carefully worded by expensive lawyers, obviously, but still satisfying. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading it while rain tapped against the windows and thinking about Walter, the old man who planted those trees decades ago. Trees make better neighbors than people. Yeah, he nailed that one. But here's the part that still divides people whenever this story comes up around town. I never took the fence down. Even after the trees started growing back. Even after the cameras were moved and the HOA backed off completely. The steel wall stayed exactly where it was. Some folks said I should have removed it once things got resolved. Said I was dragging things out to punish the whole neighborhood. Maybe they're right. Honestly, I've thought about that more than once. But every now and then, usually around sunset, I'll walk out back with a beer and look at that fence standing there between my life and people who thought money entitled them to access. And you know what? I sleep better with it there. Maybe that makes me bitter. Maybe it makes me petty. Or maybe once somebody shows you exactly how comfortable they are crossing boundaries, you stop feeling guilty for building stronger ones. So I want to ask you something. If your neighbors destroyed part of your property because they believed their view mattered more than your privacy, would you have forgiven them after the apology? Or would you have left the wall standing too? Let me know in the comments, because around here, people still argue about it to this day. And if you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because trust me, this wasn't even the craziest thing that ever happened in Belhaven County.